All right, so now let's do a front view. So same thing, we're gonna, oh, and notice I established some guidelines and I'm also using a grid. Really recommend this for any time you're trying to, do your character turnarounds or anything like that. It's just a good way to obviously align things. Um, so yeah, and obviously I could just draw right over top, but that's not what I'm going for here. I just want to give myself some guides, and I don't have to be too critical about this, but um, yeah, it is good to practice this when you can. And I know that if I don't have, if the horizontal lines are giving me the reference points to the height of each one of the forms, but then the vertical lines from the grid are giving me, alignment so that I don't sway. I always seem to tilt my art if I don't have some kind of grid there. But yeah, so like if we take this, we got the guide for the torso. Bring that over, so center. Actually, let's find center on the head shape first. And keep in mind, just like the Andrew Loomis method, you're going to slice off the sides. You don't want to leave the head too spherical. And then remember here was about our center for the brow line. And so what happens here is that the eyes are actually halfway down, right? So even though I'm just throwing in this bottom wedge shape, the fact that I started with the brow line being cut from that plane change that you see over here, generally will put the eyes right about center. So that's the other thing that you're kind of checking it against. So you're putting the brow line in place, but you're also keeping in mind that that eyes are center, halfway down from the top of the head to the bottom of the chin. The eyes are about center, and that's pretty consistent for most people. It can vary. Everybody's faces are different, and bone structures vary, but it's actually pretty consistent, I've noticed. And for your character designs, you can rely pretty heavily on that. Let's get that out of there. Or we have this kind of line that we can draw from the ear area, top of the ear where the zygomatic bone is, down to the chin. And so now let's get that egg shape in for the torso. Let's just draw in the overall shape and get it down to about here. That lines up. So remember, you can start with just a big kind of oval, big egg shape. Find center. I like to think of a W-like form. And you can really play around with this. So as I've mentioned, and I'm going to reiterate because I really want to push this stuff home for you, is that you can come up with your own forms. Their forms don't have to look identical to mine. Every artist has a different set of forms. Even if we were all trying to draw exactly the same way as our favorite artist, we're still going to come up with something a bit different, right? So just think about that for a bit and don't be too critical on yourself. Allow yourself to develop what works for you. This is just the shape that I like to see as I work up to it. Doesn't mean it's exactly what you have to see. And a lot of times, as you'll see as I do the other renditions, when we get into the more detailed stuff, I skip a lot of this naturally. And that happens as well. And a lot of people have asked me over the years, like, when do I jump to that next level where I just start drawing characters without as much of the preliminary buildup? And to that, the only thing I can say there is that don't rush it. Okay, so you're going to get to a point where you naturally do that, but you don't need to look for it. You don't need to rush yourself into it and say, "Oh, I've been drawing, this way for a year. It's really high time I started, drawing without all this basic stuff. I'm an advanced artist now." It just comes naturally, and it's different for everybody. So I don't want to give you some series of ideas that you think you need to hold yourself accountable to. It's certain people get better at drawing hands sooner. Certain people get better at drawing particular figures, the male figure better than female figures. There's so many variables. The main thing is that you just keep doing your studies. You keep looking at different techniques. You try not to be so rigid in your approach. I think that's the biggest. I really do. I think it's good to be very fluid about your thought process and constantly be searching for new and inventive ways to create so that the monotony doesn't set in. Well, it's hard to find any sense of monotony in art, but it is there. Like, you can definitely get caught up in doing the same approach over and over and get bored. Even though you're drawing these new and interesting things, sometimes you get caught in just a repetition of drawing the same character types. Things that you're a little too comfortable with, and you need to jump outside of your comfort zone. All right, so I'm going to tighten up on this. So you see we got the chin aligned, the eyes are about the same, top of the head, and we're guessing at overall width proportion. So the torso could definitely be wider. Actually, all of it could. I think that I've kind of squeezed in the body masses a little too much, so I'll widen those out as I do the redraw. Probably because I'm looking at the reference point to the left, and it's skewing my perception of what these forms should look like. But it could, we could be going for a very skinny individual as well. So, but now I can get in here and draw through this. And usually the head isn't perfectly squared off like this, so I could definitely play around with the taper of the jawline. Some people have more narrow jawlines, other people have more squared off jawlines. I'm going to place the ears, even though you really don't have to do this, but I just think they're good placeholders. So center line to the face. Again, this is roughly where the zygomatic bone would be, coming down to the chin. This line here could be a little bit more of an arc. And I really like drawing in spherical shapes for the eyes, just because as I go to render out a character, it almost always comes out a bit more realistic to the end result by placing just those simple eyeball spheres in that area. Where if I draw the eyes without it, I tend to maybe draw a little bit too angular. So not everybody does that. And then, the halfway point from the center of the eyes to the chin, you'd place the nose, it'd be right about where that line is. And, keep in mind, top of the ears is roughly where the brow is. Bottom of the ears is roughly where the bottom of the nose is. And then you would divide from the bottom of the nose to the chin. And it's not quite halfway. The mouth is a little higher than half. You want to leave more space at the bottom for the lower lip and the chin dimple there. But we'll get into that later. I just want to kind of slowly work you up to these concepts. You could get in some of the side plane of the head here. And there's all sorts of marks you could make. Some people will draw in the front plane of the forehead. Lots of triangles in this area of the face. You could drop some of those in. So again, we'll get into that more later. But yeah, just some things to think about. Your mannequin might be different than mine at this stage, right? You might want to add certain lines that that are that resonate well with the way that you draw your characters. So the spine's going to look relatively straight here, the neck area. So I'm not going to try to place any of the curvature there. But we do know that there's an S hook in here, but you're not going to curve the spine, it's something like this. So I'm not going to worry about that. Again, you can draw a little bit of a V here for the, to kind of hint towards the collarbones if you want. And I did want to widen this a little more. And I almost feel like I don't need to really widen this a whole lot, because one of the things to think about is that our bone structure is pretty you know, it's pretty small by comparison to the rest of our anatomy. You know, for instance, you know, just picture a bodybuilder that packs on a bunch of muscle. They can have a pretty small frame, but they can still get pretty big. You know, so we definitely have different size skeletons for sure. You know, and different size anatomy all the way around. But what I mean is that the structure, the underlying structure, can be relatively small, and we can still make some pretty big differences, right, with fat deposits and or muscle. So it's I don't necessarily have to go too crazy with this. I could definitely pack on a lot of muscle or fat onto this basic smaller frame. So I'll just leave it where it's at. And I'm drawing the openings to the shoulder a little bit closer to the inset of what you'd probably see. But, you know, what we would imagine is that we would add on these shoulders like this. And you see how much wider that makes the frame by itself. And if you're going for a more idealized character, bigger character, you're going to widen out those shoulders. And you're going to go for 3 heads wide. And just bring those out like this. But yeah, they're going to be a shape that's roughly like that. It's pretty poorly drawn, but hopefully you get the idea. So center line here to the chest. Actually, I think I'm going to put that curve the other way. So I'm really just trying to feel out the rounded form of this. It's not really there for any other reason. As I mentioned before, you can use it to align the pectoralis muscles, but that's this wouldn't be a definitive line for that. It would just be more of like one of these guides in the background. It's not like I would place the chest muscles right on that line is what I'm saying. Okay, so opening for the waist. Remember, you can do this any number of ways. A lot of people draw this quite differently. I've seen it done a lot of different ways. Again, opening for the legs. Now, based on the layout of the pelvis, I have drawn this to be a female frame. So, for instance, if I look to the side here, this has, for one, it has more of a tilt on the one on the left. So I need to actually correct this. So the tilt is going all the way down to here and way back up. In fact, I'm having a hard time even bringing that line that far up based upon you know, trying to make these coincide. And I think the reason being is I need to really show this bump. So something like that. You see a little bit of the back here. Yeah, I think I like that better. Again, the spine. Okay, so there we have it. That is now the front view. Let's pan back so we can see the progression there. And so again, you know, the basic start of, you know, the 3 main masses, focusing on the tilt, the orientation against the spine. Then in the second iteration, adjusting those to more organic forms. And then the third is really just, you know, converting that to a forward-facing view, talking a little bit about that process. But again, these are all just things that are getting you ready to attach the arms and legs and to think about the body in a little bit more organic feel and really focusing on the separation. And we're going to get into the twisting and contorting of the head, torso, and pelvis. It's such a big deal because it allows you to draw more dynamic, interesting characters. This is obviously very static and stiff still, but we will be approaching that soon. So with that, let's stop here and head over to our next lesson.